Hey, good Thursday afternoon, everybody. Brian Bledsoe with you here, host of the Desert Farmer Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. I know it's been a long time since we have talked, all the way back to, I think it was June 2nd, to be honest with you. I think that was our last episode. So that is a lot longer period of time than I like to go without checking back in with you. But I had a couple of trips with the family during the course of June. Very busy, obviously, with active weather for a lot of us. So my individual clients and business entities take priority over all of that stuff, obviously. And I'll be real honest with you guys. After coming out of late last winter through the spring and the real early part of this summer, I was just tired, man, worn out. And I am all about the daily grind. Those that know me know that very well, but there was just so much going on across the board, whether it was with the weather changes or not weather changes, as some of us have encountered, the rapidly intensifying El Nino, the drought that some of us were dealing with, the wildfires in the winter and early spring that were so much of a problem, the Midwest flooding. There was just a lot going on. And to be honest, just kind of fatigued in the grand scheme of things. So, aside from my day to day work, what I wanted to do was just simply put some things aside and come back to you when I was a little bit more recharged and I had a lot more information to share with you. And I've talked with a lot of you individually about this stuff, whether it was on different podcasts or whether it was just simply text or phone conversations with you individually. Uh, there were so many things going on aside from weather that had just been beating people down from a morale perspective. Whether that was ever increasing input costs or outrageous fertilizer, or whether the damn Strait of Hormuz was going to be open or closed on a daily basis. The screwworm stuff that was going on that, in my opinion, in some cases was so overhyped. There was just a lot of going on, and the doomerism and the fatigue that just encapsulates the social media platforms and the internet on a day-to-day basis. And in some cases, there were just days I just shut my laptop and just put it aside. Went to the ranch to hang out and just kind of recharge and talk to some people. And I don't think that type of break or that type of therapy can be overstated enough. And as I've said many, many times to a lot of you, for my individual clients, a lot of times, and just for different people that ask, I feel like a lot of times I'm 80% therapist and 20% meteorologist. And I say that endearingly, if you will, because I love having that kind of relationship with my individual clients where we can sit down and we can talk about something and come to a good decision that I think is going to benefit them, whether it's in the near term or the long run. So that's just simply what I've been up to. And the summer has been going fast. I mean, it's July 16th today. My kids go back to school here in less than a month. I've got a lot of things on my plate coming up in August, and then we're in PRF season. If you participate in pasture, rangeland, and forage, I've been doing PRF interval consulting now for, since 2007 for a variety of folks in different business entities. So there's a lot going on. So that's kind of my story over the past month and a half as to why I haven't been in touch. Not that I need to explain myself in any way, but I kind of like to. I kind of like to tell you what I've been up to, and I always enjoy hearing what you've been up to. So enough about that, but let's dive into some things here about what's been going on. And this meme, all right, really says it all. I want to welcome you to the shit show, all right, because that has been what a lot of this has been about in different parts of the country. So since our last chat, this is all that we've been dealing with. We had so active June in terms of severe thunderstorms with crop damage and destruction, whether you were in Northeast Colorado or Southwest Nebraska or Northwest Kansas. That area was just hammered almost on a daily basis with severe thunderstorms, whether it was hail and high wind or flash flooding, it didn't matter. We've had some drought removal and improvement during that period of time. But by the same token, we've also had drought intensification due to just simply the spotty rain. There are some places, in in parts of southwest Kansas, the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles that have been extremely dry and have missed out on a lot of the good rains that areas to the northeast. We had all-time record heat. Did you hear what happened in Montana this last Sunday? I mean, we had high temperatures in the 1 teens. Billings set an all-time record high of 111 degrees. It beat the old one of 108. We had wildfires going on across the West. We had a 100,000 acre wildfire that was burning in the wet mountains of Colorado. And we've had the delayed monsoon in some places that have kind of exacerbated that problem. And recently, we have just had some major flash flooding across parts of Texas, just in some cases, just, ridiculous amounts of rain. Bottom line, point number 7 is something that I talked a lot about back in the late winter and spring. Whenever we have a La Nina or an El Nino, which obviously we have this strong El Nino going on right now, it fuels an extreme pattern. It doesn't really matter where you are. Very few places are immune to that extreme pattern in one way, shape, or form. And some of these events that I've talked about, and I'm probably missing some, all right, I could have even gone up into Canada where they've had very wet conditions across the Canadian prairies. But bottom line, it's been a very extreme weather pattern across the board. This was a picture. I was just out at the ranch, spent a couple of days out there, and this is a picture that I grabbed on the kind of the center portion of the ranch. It's at this point where I took this photo, it's a mile high, an elevation out there. We're on the eastern edge of that Palmer Divide. And this is looking south toward our house. And my folks' house is right down here. So we're a few miles north of that. But I wanted to show you what we're dealing with at the ranch out there. And I know you look at this and you go, boy, what a mess, right? Just an absolute wreck. There's nothing that looks good about this. But I'll tell you something. For those of you that don't know what this is about, being out there, we have, short buffalo grass, highly nutritious grass, very resilient, can come out of dormancy even with just a little bit of rain. It's one of those places that can be very, very kind to cattle during the summertime. Cooler than obviously areas farther south some of the time. But bottom line, if you don't get any rain, you have to rely on what was there originally. We practice some very good rotational grazing, and we're very protective of the pastures and saving forage from the winter and from the moisture that we had last year to hopefully carry us over until we can get some rain. So I know this looks awful, but there is grass out there, and this is a pasture that we haven't had any cattle in recently, and we're fixing to move some there. There's stuff there for them to eat, and in some places on the ranch, we've been blessed with a little bit of rain here and there that has helped to do some things to bridge us to hopefully to when the monsoons start. Now, to put this in perspective, obviously that's what now, less than ideal. Not going to lie to you. Some places the ranch has received less than 2 inches of rain so far this year. However, this was the spring of 2013. We had just come off one of the driest, if not the driest, 3-year period in the history of parts of southeast Colorado and even on our ranch. This was in the spring of 13. Those are the pastures that are blowing. I believe this was in April. It escapes me a little bit, but this picture may not mean a lot to some, but I want to really kind of make a point of what this is about. You see these little green patches? That's where the little bit of buffalo grass was trying to come back after some very meager snowfall during the winter. You see the brown that's intermixed in? That is exactly where we had patches of buffalo grass die and blow out from the wind. So I know for us, all right, on the ranch and in many other places across the plains, it's bad. All right. There's just no way around that. It's bad. But when I think it's bad, I always look at this type of a picture because it was something that I hadn't seen in my lifetime. at least on our place where we had whole patches just blow out, die and blow out. And I look at this picture to kind of put it in perspective, if you will. And as I said, I'm sorry to beat the dead horse here, but putting some things in perspective is very valuable to me. And not only how I conduct my life, but how I conduct my business relationships with folks that I work for, and friends and family in general. So I always will bring up this picture. I shared this on my Twitter feed and my Facebook feed to kind of help put things into that perspective to see kind of where we are. All right. The past 3 days, as I said, in Texas have been just amazing in terms of rain totals. And not everybody's seen it. You go from complete have-nots up here in the Texas Panhandle to some of these places, Rock Springs, Texas, Kerrville, Texas, Uvalde, Del Rio, Hondo, Texas. I do some work for Bryce Britch down in Hondo, and he's had so much rain. Been dealing with drought down there for 4 years. And this year just has completely been the opposite. And on his place, had about 10 to 14 inches of rain, about 24 to 36 hours ago. And in some of these purple areas, right, scale only goes to 20 inches. There are some areas down here that have had an excess of 20 inches of rain. So there's a lot of flash flooding going on down here. Rivers are full. Some dams are being let open and whatnot. This is what El Nino can do in terms of extreme rainfall amounts. Is this a pattern relative to El Nino? Not necessarily, all right? We don't have a big blasting subtropical jet coming across the southern tier of the United States just now. This is a slow-moving, upper-level low/tropical disturbance that's combining with very rich moisture to produce this record flooding. And if you remember last summer, we had a similar flood event down here near Kerrville that took the lives of some campers. And in some cases, the rain that's associated with this is even more so than what we've dealt with this year. So, and it might not have been last year, it might have been a couple of years ago, but it's the same thing, same type of deal where we can get this kind of setup. Now, if we look at what's gone on the past 60 days in different regions, all right, we're going to break this down here. Past 60 days, we have had basically, not much of anything in that sector. And some of these maps I'll show you are kind of smoothed over a little bit. All right, so I get it. It's not perfect, but it gives you the idea. We've had great moisture across a good part of Montana. West and southwest Nebraska has been fixing some of the drought that they've been dealing with. Northwest and north central Kansas. All right. But you see parts of eastern Colorado and right in that corridor hasn't been good. Parts up here over north central, northeast Wyoming, the Pacific Northwest. Now, if we pan eastward, all right, you look at this at face value and say, oh, that's not bad. We've got some dryness here in the western Corn Belt. That's Amarillo, 68% of average over the past 60 days. And some of that, and I'd have to go back and look and see what it was measured, but some of that came from a rainfall event we had this past weekend where we picked up about 3 inches of rain in the vicinity of Amarillo. And we've been better over here around Clovis, Tucumcari, southeast toward Hobbs. You can see Texas, south half of Texas has been crazy wet, and even over here to the east. If we look at it a little bit closer, again, 60 days, you can pick out your individual areas and see who's been doing well and who hasn't been. Guyman, Oklahoma is affectionately referred to as the heart, the literal heart of the Dust Bowl. That's where the term Dust Bowl was coined by a reporter, and has had 56% of average moisture in that 60-day period. You go up here to around Liberal, Kansas, they've had about 150% of average. Look at these totals up here, around Oakley, Kansas, Colby, right there, Oakley and Colby, about 200% of average. Scott City, Kansas has been exceptionally wet. You can go southeastward here toward Wichita, has been exceptionally wet. But down here in western Oklahoma, you've been missing out in a lot of that. So again, haves and have-nots all over the place. What about the past 30 days? The past 30 days, as we narrow that, you can see who has been exceptionally wet and who hasn't. A lot of this stuff out here in Utah, western Colorado, southwest Wyoming, right here around the Four Corners has been exceptionally dry because the monsoon has either been very south biased or just simply slow to start. That's changing right now, all right, but very slow to start monsoon, which if you followed me from the spring, you know the European seasonal model was kind of in on that it was either going to be a slow starting monsoon or at least somewhat diminished monsoon. But I think we're going to make up some ground here. In the past 30 days, again, we have been very wet through that corridor right there. In some cases in Northeast Colorado, between 200 and 350% of average moisture from Sterling down toward Akron. Those communities have been very wet. And then you can see from Scott City, Oakley, Colby have been exceptionally wet. Eastward over here toward Hayes has been exceptionally wet. So that's where we sit right now. If we look at on a broader scale, you can see that a little bit more clearly. Here's your dryness in the western part of the Corn Belt right there. Okay, parts of Nebraska have been very blessed with some recent moisture and has really helped to turn things around. This is largely tied to the wet weather we've seen recently down here. But look at this. There are parts in and around Perryton, Stratford, over toward Dalhart, that have seen about 20 to 30% of average. That's Raton, 15% of average in the past 30 days. And if we put this in a little bit more closely, Dalhart, 29% of average in the past 30 days. Up here that was so good in June in southwest Kansas, we've dried things out quite a bit. We've stayed pretty wet through this corridor until here recently. But there are areas here that are getting help in southwest Texas and southeast New Mexico, but a large part of the panhandle have not been great. Lubbock has actually been about 96% of average, and they've caught a couple of rains right there in Lubbock. But you go up here around Clovis, Muleshoe, those areas, it's been bad. Not good. Hereford, Texas, 43% of average. So my point is with this is this strong El Nino that we're currently in and going into summertime always produces extremes in one way, shape, or form. It just does. And it's not going to stop going forward. So when we look at the next 2 weeks, grab this just today. This is from the regular European ensemble model. This is the upper level weather pattern. So for those of you that don't frequent this information, this is what our upper level weather pattern is doing. All right. Up over the ridge, we have this little pesky upper low that's right here that's been moving westward. All right. Underneath that ridge. And the ridge has been producing excessive heat up here across parts of the northern plains and the upper Midwest. Now, if we put this into motion over the next 2 weeks, you see that pattern change. That upper low gets out of the way, pushes its way farther west, and the ridge comes in here and starts to set up and take control. We see ridges of high pressure do this all the time, all right? We see it happen every summer. So this is no surprise, but it's always a trick to find out exactly where that ridge is going to set up, what type of upper level disturbances rotate around the ridge. You see a big trough coming over the top of that ridge here, and I'll let this cycle through again and kind of draw attention to it. You see this up over Hudson Bay and another piece of energy dropping down here through the Great Lakes in the Northeast that will kind of limit some of the heat up here across the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, and parts of the central and eastern Corn Belt. Meanwhile, that ridge positions itself eventually right about there. So the clockwise rotation around that ridge brings the monsoonal moisture up like this. All right. And some of that sneaks eastward too, around the ridge, because it continues to do that. But in terms of the main storm track, you are way up here. This is a classic summertime ridge that gets underway. And the rain chances, you're either in it or you're not. And that's essentially what this ridge is going to be about too. If you're in that monsoonal plume or you're close enough to that monsoonal plume of moisture, you can get storms to develop and outflow, and you can eventually get some storms. But you're also going to have some heat. So what I've done here is this is a 5-day sliding animation that I'm going to give you. So this first image is from tomorrow, the 17th through the 22nd. This is where the core of your heat is really placed. There's your monsoonal plume, and a little bit of that tied to your upper low and your rain here that's moving through. But plenty of heat here in the middle part of the country. Put this into motion and slide this out. You can kind of see how the heat repositions itself a little farther south, but also kind of comes back up here to the north too, across parts of the northern Rockies and northern plains. The coolest pocket, if you could call it that, okay, is going to be relegated out here into the west where we've got some of that monsoon, but also out here farther east in the wake of that disturbance that comes through. You see it kind of eat away at that heat here across the Corn Belt for a few days, and then that cooler air kind of slides its way eastward, and that heat kind of positions itself right here in the middle part of the country. All right, so that's basically from, over the next 2 weeks, that's what your pattern is going to look like. Now, in terms of precipitation anomalies, again, this is that 5-day. So this takes you from tomorrow through the 22nd. There's your real stout monsoon plume, upper low moisture, okay, associated right there. Out here in the middle part of the country, we are drier than average. Wetter than average through here with that next disturbance coming through. Putting us into motion, sliding that out, you kind of see how that dryness evolves and how that monsoonal moisture can kind of extend a little eastward there at times. See how that takes place? The dryness never fully retreats and goes away, though, here in the middle part of the country. It gets beat back a little bit, and I do think that there will be some opportunities for some rainfall in there. But as far as something that's going to completely keep the wolves away in this sector, I don't think so. And I know that out here in West Texas, the panhandles, Southwest Kansas, say, oh, well, we're in the white. That's normal. We're kind of close to that monsoonal plume out here. Could we have some happy accidents that come off the higher terrain and give us some rain chances? I think there will probably be some opportunities there. But the key to this is that the farther west and northwest you go, that's where you're going to have better potential. The farther east you go, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. Now, that being said, I'm glad that we don't have something big, awful, nasty brown here in the middle part that just simply lasts through that period of time. There is some variability that goes along with this pattern. It's just not as much as I would like to see. And there's some heat in there, which always makes it worse. So the 2 weeks here, for those of you that really need the rain out here farther east, I think it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. It's not something that I like talking about. I don't like giving bad news, but it is what it is at this point. The weather patterns this time of year, as you well know, are very hard to dramatically change through this. And I think that that's the way things are going to finish out as we head through the rest of this month. If we look beyond that, the Euro extended model, forecast rainfall temperature anomaly through mid-August, or actually through late August, I should say. This actually takes us right through the 30th of August. So it'd be the 31st of July through the 30th of August. It continues with the monsoon out here. All right. If you're in that plume, you're probably doing okay. Some of that green even extends right there into far eastern New Mexico, right there close to West Texas, right? Your driest basically ends up, all right, east of that line. The less variability probably along that line. All right. So like I said, for those far western plains areas, I'm not saying you're not going to get, all you want in terms of moisture, but I at least say that there's better rainfall opportunities for you than maybe out here in the middle part of the country where some of that dryness is going to extend. And when it comes to heat, I still think we're going to have some heat to contend with here in the middle part of the country. I talked a lot about that in our seasonal forecast that I shared with my clients, a while back. But you can clearly see where you have average to cooler than average. That's where your main monsoonal plume is going to be. And some of that will extend a little farther east. Some of that will also extend a little farther west. But you can see where that heat signal is. Could these anomalies be overdone with the Euro? Sure. All right. The European extended model, as I've said repeatedly, has biases, especially if it's dry early or if it's hot early. It will carry that bias into the forecast throughout. But is this a tell, if you will, of what the pattern is going to be in August? I say that there's a better shot of that taking place based on what's happening right now, based on where the position of that ridge is going to be than the alternative. Hope I'm wrong. Hope I'm wrong on that. But that's where we're sitting right now. Let's put that behind us a little bit and talk about what the current state of the oceans is and what this is going to mean going forward. So if we look at the current sea surface temperature anomalies, it's just the anomalies right now, you see really strong El Nino right here along the equator, right there. All right. Uh, and we've had a little bit of warming take place over here in the Indian Ocean. All right, that's also a tell for what's going to happen over here in the Indian Ocean as it warms up. We have warmer than average water here in the Pacific Meridional mode. All right, we also have a warm blob right there, Northern Pacific, and this pool right here, and I'm going to show you a little more of it, okay, that I just highlighted. There's some cooler than average water there. Not everywhere, all right, but I don't like to ever see any cool water in that horseshoe kind of pattern right there with warmth right there. That is a reflection of the negative or cold phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. You've heard me talk about it a lot. The North Atlantic also has some interesting things. We still have that cold subpolar pool right there, warmer here through the central, some cooler water or average to cooler water right there in the main development region of the hurricane. And we also have what's called the Atlantic Nina or Atlantic La Nina. You can have La Nina and El Nino on both oceans. I don't know if you knew that or not, but you can. This Atlantic Nina is a reflection, all right, of the easterly trade winds here that upwell water and cool. It's largely in response to the real strong El Nino that's going on in the Pacific. And a lot of times you can look to see if an Atlantic La Nina occurs sometimes before an El Nino that can kind of give you a little bit of information and say, oh, well, if that's happening in the Atlantic, we might start to see this show up in the Pacific. Not the case this year, as the El Nino is just a blowtorch right now, and the Atlantic is responding to that with those stout easterly trades. That's why you're seeing that cooler water right there. So that's what's going on just in the absolute value. Now, the past 15 days, we've seen continued warming here in the ENSO regions along the equator, and we've had a little bit of warming take place right there where it's been a little bit cooler. We've also had some warming take place there, a little bit cooler here and there. But I'd say here, all right, and I'm going to erase this, I would say as a whole, we've probably had more warming take place in that area than cooling. Still some cooling here and there, but I think more warming. Now, what if we measure those sea surface temperatures in relation to the global mean? What you see here is that cooler horseshoe right there. Again, reflective of the negative phase of the PDO. And I probably could have even drawn that a little broader, all right, with something like that. So, and I've talked about this before, back in the winter, spring, because a lot of times when we get cooler than average water, Gulf of Alaska and down the West Coast, all right, even in relative terms, that can place the heat and dry signal in the middle part of the country. And we've seen that evolve. Why have we seen that evolve? Well, because of the El Nino that's gone on. We've had strong storm systems churn up the Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea, and that has kind of perpetuated that cooler than average signal up there. So it's always important to look at it versus the global mean. It can kind of give you some clues as to what's going on. And we kind of have the same thing going on out here in the Atlantic. Cooler there, broad cooling all the way through there with a little bit of warmth sandwiched in between. All right. But and the Indian Ocean has been somewhat mixed, in terms of, in relation to the global mean. I think that's going to warm up though. But that's what's going on right now. The Southern Oscillation Index is so negative right now. Look at the April reading, the May and June. Do you see how it's tumbled? All you have to do is have a 30-day running mean of -7 or lower to technically be an El Nino status. This El Nino has been coupled since late April through May and really got going in June. And by coupled, I mean the ocean and the atmosphere are working together to keep this El Nino pattern going. And the dailies, some of the dailies contributions to the SOI have been just ridiculous. Down here in the 40s, the -40s, the -30s, that means this El Nino is continuing to strengthen. And the average SOI for the past 30 days has been down there at -25.5. And look at the 90-day. The 90-day, that's not what this dashed kind of yellowish line is. You see, it's been continuing to drop. So if you thought this El Nino was going to be a flash in the pan or not continue to strengthen or just come for a little time and leave, no, Not at all. This thing is going to continue to steamroll right through the remainder of this year, the way it looks right now. And beneath the surface, put this warm pool, all right? All of this warm water beneath the surface, all the way down to 200 meters in places, is going to continue to come to the surface. Not to the warming extent that it is beneath the surface, but it will continue to keep these sea surface temperature anomalies very much elevated and this El Nino very much intact. Now, if you look over here in the West Pacific, all right, because over here is Indonesia, all right, and over here is the west coast of South America. Do you see how there's not a big sustained warm pool over here? That's because due to this steady state of the westerly wind bursts that have been coming across the Pacific, it basically evacuates all the warmer than average water that's in the Western Pacific and shoves it east. And that's one reason why a lot of times after a real stout El Nino like what we're seeing, we'll actually have a La Nina episode following. And I will talk more about that later on. But you can see the seeds being sown over here in the Western Pacific for that potential transition to a La Nina after this thing gets out of the way. I know a lot of you don't want to hear that, but just the way it is. Measuring that in a different metric, you can see that since, back in mid-April, where we were around, positive 0.5 degrees C, all we've done is just skyrocket this thing to above 2 degrees Celsius, putting it technically in super El Nino or very strong El Nino territory. Just, call it what you want. Real strong El Nino, and it's continuing. The latest Copernicus 3 multi-model forecast system, looking at these sea surface temperature anomalies with all of these different models over here, right? You've got some modeling up here at 5 degrees C by December, and you've got some modeling down here around 1.5 degrees C. Either way, all right, if you take out the extremes here on high and low end, in November, and December, we max this thing out greater than 3 degrees Celsius. And probably somewhere up here, maybe between 3.2 and 3.5 degrees. I'm not sure we'll go to 4. We're probably going to settle it somewhere in the low 3.2 range as far as a max. That would be a record-setting El Nino since we've been measuring it, and is going to have some pretty significant impacts as we go forward through fall, winter, and likely even into the early part of 2027. And by early part, probably at least through the first third to maybe half of the year before we start to see this thing get out of here. If we just look at the European seasonal model, all of those red lines are the different members. You can see where it kind of settles up here. We peak in kind of that November, December timeframe, and then we start to come off of that peak a little bit here in January. Also typical for an El Nino to do something like that. After we come out of the early to midwinter, we start to fall off a little bit. So I would expect that to take place. But between now and then, we still have a long ways to go before we're going to see this thing peak. The Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia is the same way. You can see where it peaks up here, kind of keeps it right up there around that 3.2 threshold. I think that's very much in line with what this forecast is going to be. So very good agreement with this. Now, for those of you that may be new to this, these are the prevailing patterns, all right? Every El Nino is different. Every La Nina is different, but the prevailing patterns, if you just look at how things go on an average level, La Nina, one storm track right here, all right? El Nino, subtropical jet cranks across the south and produces different conditions than what you get over here with La Nina. It just kind of flip-flops, does it not? Yeah, you can look at these different areas and see that trend. So it stands to reason if we have a strong El Nino going on and possibly a record setter, that if you live in the southern tier of the country, you're probably going to have some pretty active weather coming our way fall and winter as we wrap up 26 and head into 27. And then we'll probably have something like this come back later in 27 and probably 28. But as I said, I'll have more on that in a little bit. The latest European seasonal model, this came out on the 5th of this month. All right, just to revisit this, I know a lot of you probably looked at this, but if we look at the upper level weather pattern for August through January, this is the pattern prevailing for August. So again, has that ridge down here. You can see why I'm kind of, bearish on moisture here in the middle part of the country with that. All right. Monsoon popping out here to the west. What about September? September, we start to see the seasonal change take place. A little bit of troughiness up here in the Gulf of Alaska. A little bit of bagginess down here off the coast of California. Likely means we're going to be bringing some storms in like this. Monsoonal moisture like this. Tropical moisture from hurricane stuff out in the eastern Pacific. Perfect recipe to get some business going here across a good part of the country in terms of wet weather. October, November, and I want you to watch what starts to happen out here in the Pacific. December. Look at that Aleutian low. What this does, all right, and you even got, essentially upper level low pressure down here too. But we are just ripping this subtropical jet like this. North of that, the flow is doing something like this. And what we're going to have up here is some blocking that's going to take place somewhere up here in northeast Canada or around Greenland and kind of keeps this pattern locked in. But what we're doing in the meantime is just flooding the country with Pacific air. With this pattern, it makes it very difficult to get a lot of cold air south, right? It's because of that, because it floods us with Pacific air. And that's the forecast upper level weather pattern for December, all right? If we go to January, crazy, even more so. Look at this, anomaly out here, cold upper level low pressure, just ripping that jet through that sector right there. Now, north of that, again, you're doing something like this with the pattern, right? Blocking up here over Greenland and ridging that extends like this, that likely kind of perpetuates some dryness through some parts of maybe the Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies, and up here into the Northern Plains. That would be very on brand for an El Nino, but that's the upper level pattern. If we look at the temperature anomaly forecast, right? Anomaly, we've got heat out here in the center for August, as I showed you a little bit ago. September, this is all due where it isn't like maybe cooler than average, but you see the heat completely void in the southwest. That's because of the monsoonal pattern and the active weather that's going on there. Still some heat signal here and also up here in the Pacific Northwest. October, that shifts a little farther east. Obviously, active weather south, warmer north with less active weather. This is where we really start to see it in November. All due to that active subtropical jet, all due to that Pacific flow here. December, January. January is interesting because it looks like we cool things off here in the middle part of the country, but this warmth that's up here over Hudson Bay, Greenland, likely due to the block that takes place up here, all right, in that blocking pattern, keeping things very active farther south. Warmer out here. What about precipitation anomalies? Again, August, the model was pretty much all in dryness here in August. You don't see a big monsoon pop there in August, though. You see even some brown here across parts of Arizona and New Mexico. A little diminished or / late to the party. If we look at September, as I said, things get more active here. October, November. See the little dry signal that shows up out here? You can kind of connect the dots underneath, certainly. December, we actually bring wetter conditions into all of the Pacific coast. And January. You don't see a lot of green down here, do you? Across New Mexico, Texas, and in the plains. I'm curious if this is just merely a connect the dots pattern, or if we're placing the influences of the troughs too far west and southwest and then too far east. There's no brown here in the middle part of the country. There's just no over-the-top green, at least with the European model. What about the NMME? Let's look at it. August, kind of similar to the Euro. I'm not going to belabor the point here. I'm going to kind of go through them a little quickly. September, October, November, see all the white? Likely average to cooler than average because of the subtropical jet. December, same thing. Look at the warmth up here. January, February, cooler than, all this is cooler than average. with the warmth going over the top. And I think this is largely just due to the active pattern here, not necessarily a lot of cold air coming down, because if that was the case, we'd be cooler up here. And March. No, this is a long ways out there, but that's what it looks like. And remember, in March, we would be coming off of that La Nina peak and probably getting ready to start that, toward neutral and transition maybe toward La Nina as we go to the summer. Precipitation wise, this is August. So you can see, not exactly the wettest in that signature right there. All right. September, there's your monsoon. No big dry signal in September, though. October, we get much wetter. Some dryness in the northwest. November, still very active, drier northwest. December, very active, likely through that corridor. January, drier northwest, all the way up here through the northern plains. February, we're continuing with this trend, likely because the model is still demonstrating strong El Nino characteristics, which would be on brand for that. And even into March, it's doing the same thing. All right. But as I said, long ways out there, just the model, going to have to look at. What about the Copernicus 3, August to December? Heat signal out here to the west, certainly, and the southeast. September, stoutest signal is northwest. No, October, we start to see the heat go away, don't we? Look at that. That's November and December. And look at all the warmth up here in eastern Canada. And certainly, if we've got a big upper low out here, we are flooding this with Pacific air and your active subtropical jet down here. If we look at the precipitation anomaly, big monsoon going on here for August, farther west. But look at the dry signal here. See the dry signal extending northward from Texas into the western part of the Corn Belt? Yep. There's some model agreement with the drier than average August. Maybe not off the chain dry, but drier than average, I think, is the play here, with the potential for some flash drought mixed in. September, we break that down, at least by way of the model here. October, November, do you see the dry signal starting up here? How wet that is. December, dry signal really starts to get materialized up here in southern Canada and northern parts of the U.S. Montana, Idaho, down here into parts of Wyoming, the Dakotas, northern Minnesota, so on and so forth. All right. And we remain very active across the southern tier. The latest Climate Prediction Center outlook came out today. All right. So when we look at drought indices, all right, let's look at those. This is short-term drought. This was done on the 13th, so it's a couple of days old. But short-term dryness, this is where it has been the worst, right? And I'm just rough sketching, all right? But you get the idea. This out here is where it's been the worst in those regions in the short term. What about the long-term dryness? You see it expand? We still have healing to do. Very much so. In these areas. All of these areas out west, we have healing to do. Even some healing to do here, and even back here across the mid-Atlantic and up across parts of Minnesota. So the short term tells a story, but long term, we have quite a ways to go before we're going to see complete drought removal. It's better, as I've said repeatedly, you can still be in a drought technically, but conditions can be better if you get a little bit of rain. So what I'm hopeful of, or hopeful for, is that this El Nino can at least help mitigate some of the dryness here in the Southwest or the Southern Plains. All right. That is not a slam dunk. A lot of that is going to be predicated on, kind of how the PDO phases out, how the Atlantic quad pole mode comes into play or not. I'm hopeful, though, that this El Nino signal is just so strong that it overwhelms some of those other things that can sometimes help offset that El Nino to not be as classical as it is. But this El Nino so far is about as classical as you can get in terms of its evolution and strength and where that warmth is positioned. The seasonal drought outlook, again, this is from today through Halloween, all right, where you're seeing the greens and kind of the grayish tan color right there. That's where drought improves, and you've got some removal in there too. Some drought development, Pacific Northwest, Minnesota, up here into Wisconsin. Drought continuing here. Again, can have some help, just may not completely remove it. That's through, Halloween. So things could be worse here, I guess, over that, what is that? That three-month period, that 90-day period. But I think we're going to have some ground to make up there in September and October after we come out of August. Just a hunch. Okay. What about the Climate Prediction Center precipitation and temperature anomaly forecast? August to January. This is August, September, October. Notice this is only where they're putting dryness. Why is there no dryness here? I think it's because if we get the dryness in August, we're all in on September and October not being dry. So those 2 months likely offset the August month here. That's why you're not seeing the brown here. Big monsoon continues out west, all right? Because when we go, as I'll show you in a second, we look at temperatures, warmest out west, I still think we could have some heat here in the middle part of the country, but most of that heat would be tied to August, not necessarily September, October. So that's why you're not seeing any red here in the middle part of the country. If we go to precipitation, September, October, November, you can see that here. Monsoon will pop here. Temperature-wise, biggest heat signal northwest. October note, active south. Drier northwest. Warmest north and northwest. November, December, January, still active south. Drier north and northwest. And we're warmer, blowtorch across the northern tier versus not so much south where that active subtropical jet goes through. All right. The latest CCSR and IRI came in today too. This is August, September, October. Big monsoon pop. Why is there no dryness out here? As I said, I think because the model thinks September and October will overcompensate for any dryness in August. Temperature-wise, not a whole lot to glean other than just warmer than average in places. September, October, November precip. Look at the wet signal here across the southern tier. Drier there, a lot wetter south. Temperature-wise, again, not as warm, but still present. I think that's due to the Pacific flow. Look at this signal for October, November, December. These are just off-the-chain anomalies for southern Nebraska, western Kansas, eastern Colorado, and across the southern tier, where some of those areas are 60 to 70+% certain that above average moisture is going to take place. Temperature-wise, cooler where it's wetter, all right? And if we look at November, December, January, same story, all right? Very active south, parts of the west and southwest high plains, drier northwest and across the northern plains, very much on brand for a strong El Nino. And temperature-wise, where you're active, you're average to cooler than average with those temperatures. No big Arctic air coming down with this setup, all right, because of the Pacific flow. Historically, let's look at that. These are just with the super El Ninos that have occurred. And I'm going to kind of steam through this here. But those 3 years, 82, 83, 90, none of these years are perfect analogs. This is just simply with the strong El Ninos. But you see for these cities in Colorado, you can see what percentages above average that they end up being in these years. Kansas, some areas that suffer for fall moisture, Hays, maybe Wichita. Other than that, not too bad. Certainly areas farther southwest do very well. West and southwest historically do very well with moisture. Again, the green is fall, the blue is winter. Nebraska. Oklahoma. These panhandle cities would love this. Guymon and Boise City. Look at this. Fall moisture, anywhere from 112 to 130% of average. Winter moisture up there around 150% of average. All right. Some areas that get shorted in the fall, maybe Enid and Oklahoma City, up here toward Woodward. That's just for these 3 years. This isn't exactly what's going to happen. This is just for these 3 years. Texas. Look at some of these moisture levels in the winter. All right. Childress, 161% of average. Lubbock, 157%. Plainview, Amarillo, out of those 3 years, averaged 174% of average. Maybe a little short in the fall, but I don't think that's going to be the case necessarily. New Mexico, wet in the winter. A lot of these areas wet in the fall. Montana, shorted in places. Why? Because you're up there in the north where there's no big storm track. All right. So snowpack in Montana, especially the west and the northwest part of the state, probably going to be a struggle. Wyoming, mixed signals here. All right. Fall winter seems to be better in parts of Wyoming than winter moisture. Over here in Laramie, 80% of average. Rollins, 79% of average. Rock Springs and Jackson, probably going to be that or even less this year would be my guess. But we might do okay in the fall. And that's hopefully due to the late season monsoon as well as the seasonal change. Now, what about the PDO? What's going on with it and what lies beyond this El Nino? Well, you kind of already know. The PDO all the way back to 98 has largely been negative. You know this already. I've talked about it a lot. The last significant positive phase of the PDO that lingered was the last Super El Nino of 15 and 16. All right, right there. Other than that, it's been negative. And really, this since 2020, you can see that we've been stoutly negative, not even sniffing normal or above normal over a period of time. So that negative PDO a lot of times can hurt moisture in the western plains, the southwest high plains, the desert southwest, you bet. Hasn't been a great party most of the time over the past several years. This is the upper level weather pattern I showed you from the Euro. If we have a big Aleutian low up here, it's going to be churning out storms and churning up water here, keeping that upwelling going and keeping those sea surface temperatures likely cooler than average. This is January's. It's the same thing. So when you get a strong El Nino going on with something like this, the opportunity for the pattern, at least as far as the PDO is concerned, to go back to neutral or even positive with this type of setup is diminished. So what I'm saying is the PDO is probably going to remain in a negative phase. I've kind of lost hope for that. I really hope I'm wrong, but I've kind of lost hope that the PDO can go into a positive phase with this setup for the reasons that I've just mentioned. How does that play a role after the fact? Well, historically, whenever we have a cold or a negative PDO, it makes it that much easier to have a La Nina episode, more frequent La Nina episodes, stronger La Nina episodes, and longer lasting La Nina episodes. So the latest model analog, okay, from the PSL here, all of these red bars indicate probability that we're going to be in El Nino. All the blue bars represent probabilities that we are going to be in a La Nina. You see what happens there? May, June, July of 27. Right now, that seems to be the transition point where El Nino completely goes away. We have a short window of neutrality, and then we revert back to La Nina as we finish 27 and go into 28. Some of these probabilities this far out, that is a really strong signal to go into the spring of 28 with La Nina probabilities being up there above 80%. That's wild. That is wild. So not only am I looking at this thing saying La Nina is very likely after we get this El Nino out of the way, but historically, after we have an El Nino of any type of magnitude, especially a strong one, a lot of times we will have a strong La Nina that follows it. And that is not good news for the southwest part of the country. That is not good news for eastern New Mexico or West Texas or the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas or southeast Colorado or southwest Kansas or whatever. That is not good news. We really need to capitalize, and hopefully this El Nino doesn't displace the subtropical jet stream so far south that we miss out on that we can at least get a period of time here where moisture is good. We can recover, because after we recover, I don't like what I'm seeing out here. I just don't. So my thoughts on this. Big monsoon is going to come for some of us. No way around that. Strong El Nino is here. It's been here. record-setting El Nino is possible. There is not even a perfect analog on the map for what we're seeing. And that's especially since we haven't seen an El Nino this strong with a negative PDO signature. The last time we had a strong El Nino with a negative PDO was 2023, and it kind of behaved atypically in places. Could it have different impacts? Could it have an enhanced impacts? That's some work we have to do in the future here. The models continue to suggest very active fall and winter for some areas. I showed you that. And the return of La Nina later in 27, I know I have a question mark there, but my certainty is continuing to rise with how things are playing out. The more I dig back into history with these things, and the more I see every type of model evidence come forward that shows that. Folks, I know that's a ton of information, but I had a lot to share with you today. And I hope you enjoy this type of deep dive. I don't pretend to be the smartest man in the room when it comes to this. My goal is to help to break some of this stuff down so it can be actionable, meaningful, and much more plain language going forward. I always love your feedback, positive or negative, okay? I always like to learn from that kind of thing. And if you have anything for me personally that I can do for you, this is exactly how to get in touch with me. If you need weather for your business, short-term, long-term, or whatever, that's what I do for a living. So please feel free to reach out to me. Hit me up on my cell. Go to my website, smash that blue bar in the center, put out a quote for you, or just simply send me an email. Either way, I greatly appreciate your listenership and your viewership since we've transitioned this to YouTube. And I hope you're doing well physically and mentally. I know mentally it at times has been a struggle. And I hope that you're doing well on that behalf, because we need to. We've got to, especially when we're fighting through the things that we are. You folks take care, and I'll be chatting with you again here real soon on the Desert Farmer Podcast.